Please welcome Punchbowl News founder Jake Sherman.
Sorry, everybody. Hi. We were having a conversation about college basketball backstage, and that really threw me off. I'm Jake Sherman, the founder of Punchbowl News. Thank you so much for joining me in this pop-up conversation with House Energy and Commerce Chairman Brett Guthrie. A big thank you to the National Rural Electrical Association for partnering with us to make this event possible. We'll be talking news of the day with Chairman Guthrie, and luckily there's nothing to talk about, so that'll go quickly. And then focusing on electric grid reliability. Afterward, I'll be joined on stage by former Congressman Jim Matheson, now CEO of NRECA, for a fireside chat. A big thank you to everyone joining us in person and on the live stream. And as always, you can find Punchbowl News on all social media at Punchbowl News, and we encourage you to share the conversation. Now I'd like to welcome Chairman Brett Guthrie to the stage. Okay, we can't talk about college basketball.
No, but not from a Kentucky perspective. Not right now. Then we have Arkansas. Coach Calipari's winning. So
yeah.
God bless Coach Cal. We all loved him. Even though he left, we still loved him and still do.
Not sour at all about that, it doesn't sound like. Okay, we are going to start with some quick news of the day questions. It seems like Congress is going to head toward another reconciliation process. Budget reconciliation is obviously fast-track budget bill. You had a bunch of stuff.
We were busy last time.
On the healthcare side more than anything. In the last bill, what if we do have on the Hill another reconciliation bill? What are your top two priorities?
Well,
what is feasible? Let's put it that way.
What is feasible? So one thing, we had a couple of things fall out of the bill because of the bird rule, and my understanding is, well, if you can change some things around and you can get in. We had a score of $70 billion that was either, I don't know, it was fraud. It wasn't really fraud, but it was fraud. Some of it was fraud, but just misuse in the tax credits, the Affordable Care Act tax credits, which the government shut down for 43 days before there was $70 billion, and we had another $30 billion. So we had $100 billion in healthcare that was based on the way insurance is paid. So it doesn't affect hospitals, it doesn't affect others, and so that would be something we would look to. If there's an opportunity to do permit reform, and
that's music to the ears of many.
I know. I was just in Houston, and that was the music in everybody's ears. And so we want to do it. We had some permit reform in the One Big Beautiful Bill reconciliation, and that fell out too in the bird rule, and so some pipeline across state line pipelines and so forth. So the question is, how do you massage that to make that birdable, which is a word that we use up here that's really a Senate word. So a senator would have to explain that to you, but we're ready to do what we need to do. But there are some things we could still do in healthcare if it would pass the bird rule. And then, gosh, the biggest priority of the committee is I think, hopefully both sides, which wouldn't have to be reconciliation, but we could, I think, do more to I know we're going to talk more about energy, but that would be what we absolutely need to produce more energy.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about that. Let me ask you on one or two more. Well, I'll just keep it to one because we have a lot to talk about. You were quickly coming up on the midterms. We're 200-something days away. How do you feel sitting here today, and what do you feel about your Senate race?
So one on the midterms overall, it's always a tough environment for the party in control. It's just historically that way. However, we should have won in the Senate, my side, Republican side, in 2010. And we lost Senate races because we didn't nominate the right person in those races. And I've seen a couple of my members of my committee are in really vulnerable seats, and at least in one expect to have a very from the far left kind of opponent. So the question is, we have the best candidates. The people who won these tough seats are tough. Marinette Miller-Meeks, Gabe Evans are on my committee. Tom Kaine have won in tough districts.
Yep.
And so the question, we got to see what our gas price is going to be, but I think there was a quote that Richard Hudson uses, our NRCC chairman, that they say the wind is in their favor, but the terrain that we're fighting on is in our favor. We have far more members who are in seats that Trump won that are vulnerable than we have in seats that Harris won. So, and in those seats we have great candidate Brian Fitzpatrick, who's really fought some really tough races.
And you have the president tonight speaking at your NRCC dinner. He'll raise you $20, $30 million, something like that, which helps.
It's getting the turnout. We were chatting earlier. In 2024, Trump got 1.34 million votes in Kentucky. In 2023, which is an odd year, our governor got elected, Democrat governor, with 694,000 votes. So that fall off between a presidential year and a non-presidential year is what we have to focus on, getting people to vote.
Let's talk about the topic at hand, energy and grid reliability. You were just in Houston, as you said. Tell us what you were doing there. You were at CERAWeek, so I think that's what you were doing. You were talking with energy executives, utilities, large power users. What's your biggest takeaway you're bringing back here to D.C. about the reliability of the grid?
Well, the takeaways, the first is, what's the mission? And you always start with a mission. And we've spent the year on energy and commerce, because I think that if you want to unify 435 members of the House, regardless of political spectrum, it is, how do we beat China? I think that unifies everybody.
That's the only issue that unifies everybody.
That unifies everybody. And how do you beat China in AI? And how do you beat them, and who's going to control AI? Gary Palmer, who's a colleague of mine from Alabama, always says, whoever controls AI, whoever wins the battle, I guess with you it's not really control it, but wins the battle, which society does, is going to be not a superpower, but the superpower. And I believe that. If you read Eric Schmidt's book, he wrote a book called Genesis, the last book with Henry Kissinger wrote, and it really sets the global stage for AI and how AI is going to be used. So it gets to energy, because it takes energy to drive AI. And we know what not to do. You can look at Europe. And it's sad, actually, I think, because a strong Europe and a growing Europe is good for America. It's sad, some of the decisions they made, and it's over the way they regulate, which is in my committee, but also while we're here in the energy. You know, energy is 3 times the price in Europe than it is here. They don't have the abundance that we have, but there are decisions made. And so the question is not whether we have the energy to do it, whether we have the will to produce the energy. So you sit with the big titans of AI, and they'll say, we have to win the battle, we have the brain power and we have the capital. Boy, do they have the capital. But what we don't have is the right regulatory environment, which is something we can talk about later if you want, or in another time. And are we going to have the energy to compete? Bill Gates say that a massive Microsoft data center, one of the big ones, will use as much power, will use 1 gigawatt of power. And I said, boy, that sounds like a lot. What's a gigawatt? The city of Seattle. So is 1 gigawatt of power. And so you know how those grids develop is over time. You know, if 100,000 people move, 1 million, you know, 1 decade, maybe 1 million people moved to Seattle when it was booming. But you build that. You guys are, I got some, I know co-op folks in here. You build those over time. Now you got one customer coming in and say, we want to double the power. You need to double the power you produce. And it scares communities. And how do we make that work?
Do you feel like Congress is operating with enough real information about how much new load is coming, where it's coming, and who should bear the cost?
Well, I do. So these guys we do know that if you're going to have a data center, it's going to take the load. Now, do I know whether it needs 1 gigawatt or 500 megawatts? I mean, I don't know. You have the experts to say what they need. But yeah, we're going to insist. And these guys are willing to pay for it. They're willing to pay for it because they need it that bad. And they have the money, as I said. And some of them were talking about producing President talked a little bit about it in the State of the Union, having their own power source and being able to produce their own power. So obviously the people who are going to consume it need to pay for it. It doesn't need to raise rates for people in their homes. And that's, so I do believe we're operating with the right information. I don't know I can tell you exactly the gigawatt of power, number we need, but I can tell you, I do know we have they're saying we need 150 more gigawatts of power over the next decade. Whether it's 150 or 100, I couldn't answer that. But I do know we have 112 gigawatts of power scheduled to go offline that we have to fix. We do know that.
So energy and commerce is unique because it has, I think, what did John Dingell say? If it moves, it's energy. If it doesn't, it's commerce. So
yeah, my improvement on that, I don't know if there's improvement. My version of that is it takes energy to move commerce.
That's right. Okay,
yeah, that's what I say. So I don't want to improve on Mr. Dingell. But
yeah, okay. Well, his portrait's up. Yours will be too someday, I guess. So you deal with big tech companies and you deal with obviously with energy. Big tech companies are talking much more openly, as you just alluded to, about earning community trust and cutting demand during peak periods. Does that tell you that the private sector understands that grid reliability and not just speed to market has to come first?
Well, I think so, because what you're seeing in our area, there are areas that are trying to develop, and I think you see it across the country, data centers, and there's been some local opposition to data centers coming in. And so I think big tech is like, most big companies, we're going to come create all these jobs and move in, everybody's just going to throw out the welcoming mat. And people really are concerned. They say, well, how big is it? What's it going to do to the grid? Are you going to use prime farmland in my area? That's a concern. And if you saw, the president rolled out the AI working group, the 4 C's. One of the C's was community, to make sure that they don't come in and steamroll communities. We don't want that. But I do have a community. I was interesting you said that. I talked to a county executive that they're going to build a data center on an old steel aluminum plant. So it's already got transmission. It's got 450 megawatts of power already kind of coming to it. It's only a high river, so there's an unlimited source of water. So all of the concerns, not farmland, it's an old site, and it is still getting some opposition. And what he wants to explain, and what we need to explain, is it's $3 billion of construction costs. I don't know what the property value, if it's somewhere close to $1 billion of property value, but they have a utility tax of 3%. So I said, take 0.03% times 450 megawatts times the cost of a megawatt, and then show the schools you're going to build, the community centers you're going to build, the swimming pools, the public golf, the sports complexes for kids you're going to build. So there can be real benefits to community, and communities need to have a say. There are places where they don't belong, but there are places where they do belong, and because if you get 100 people show up of a county of 20,000, and you get 100 to 150 people show up to a county commission, we call them fiscal court meeting, it packs the room. But the other 20,000, well, how does this benefit me? And these groups need to show how it benefits the world, and we need to beat China, so we all need to be focused on that. But the local communities need to see how it benefits them, and I think it will.
You've said grid reliability is one of the most important issues that still doesn't really break through politically in communities. Washington still treats blackouts as a regional problem instead of a national economic and security problem.
Right.
Why? Why, and how do you fix that?
Well, so how do you fix it? So that's the discussions we're having here. How much needs to be from Washington? How much can be state and local? If you look at states that have clean energy requirements, net zero targets, all the others, their price of energy is about 28 to 30% more expensive than the rest. I had grandkids at Disneyland about a year and a half ago, and I'm pumping, this is a grid, gas, but it's energy, gas in my car, and the guy, I couldn't help myself. I said, do you guys have any idea what the rest of the world pays for gasoline? I mean, are y'all, it was about $2 more a gallon in California than in Kentucky. And it's decisions that those local decision makers, state decision makers have made that's caused that.
You're too young to have grandkids, though.
Oh, I'm not. They're young, but I do have a few of them. Young enough to take to Disneyland anyway. But so that's the point is, so where do you say, well, if these blue states want to put these in place, that's going to raise the price to their consumer. But then I was in New Jersey with Tom Kean about 2 weeks before the last governor's election, and the ads were affordability of electricity. And all of the cost of electricity that they were complaining about was result of the General Assembly of New Jersey, not what Congress had done. And it was interesting, but that played. And so my concern is if we don't figure out how to explain to people that these actions your states are taking are going to cost you money, they're going to vote in people that are going to make that national.
Yeah.
And we don't, and everybody's going to pay more for it, and that's not what we want.
Is your diagnosis, is the bigger threat to reliability surging demand? You mentioned premature retirements. Which
premature retirement, that's stopped or slowed.
Or transmission bottlenecks, or all of these things? I mean, is it?
Well, it's all of it. I mean, we've been, kind of steady, well, actually just steady demand of electricity over the last, by kind of deindustrializing America over the last, since the 80s, I guess. And the demand for growth in electricity is, regional, when some cities are growing like Atlanta and Charlotte and others where other cities weren't. But now it's nationwide.
Yep.
And we've got to get the right policy in place. And we spent really a year. I had Eric Schmidt from Google, as I said, testify before Energy and Commerce to set the stage, because I think we all agree we want people to have affordable, dispatchable power. There's some question about what technology can do that, and I think it's proven out. We looked at the winter storm that just came through, where New England created more electricity through burning refuse and wood than they did with wind and solar. And somebody pointed to me, well, you can't just pick the worst day of the year and pick on wind and solar, but you need the power on the worst day of the year. And it's like Churchill Downs has 150,000 seats. They need that one day a year. But they need it that one day a year, or actually 2 days. We have the Oaks the day before. I don't want to sell them short. But they need those seats for that one day a year. So we need that power for that 1 or 2 days a year. Because if you don't have it that day, that's when people freeze.
So you talked about affordability, and it's clearly a huge political issue this year. It always is. What's driving the most pain right now, in your view? Is it fuel costs, underbuilt infrastructure, regulatory pressure? I think you would assume that you would say that's
all
one
together.
Of them. Or policy choices that got ahead of the physical reality?
I think it's all of it. So what drives fuel costs is we have the energy, is being able to move it. So one of the things when we were in Houston this week, we have the oil, we have the gas, we have everything we need, is getting it to where it needs to be cheaper. And so you have some states that have banned like natural gas pipelines coming in. Well, if you can't move natural gas to where you could have the cheapest natural gas in the world, which we do, but if you can't use it because you can't get it there, it doesn't do any good. And so the question we're debating, this is the big question. So at what point does Washington say, the decisions you made in New York and New Jersey have really cost New Jerseyans more money, so we're just going to take those decisions away from the locals and do it from Washington. And that's a fair debate to have.
Yeah. Your committee has moved 12 bills aimed at boosting generation and giving grid operators more tools to prevent blackouts. Which of those bills would make the most immediate real-world difference if the Senate acted on it tomorrow, which don't hold your breath, because they're probably not.
Not going to act on it tomorrow. The big ones in so when people in the room are talking about pipelines, we kind of divide this by 3 committees. You've got transportation has a bit of it. NEPA, which is the big reform I think a lot of people are asking for, is natural resources. For us, is the Clean Water, Clean Air Act changes. It doesn't change any standard. The standards are the same. It's just the shot clock on the process. If you could get 100 people in a room and 99 say this is the perfect place, the perfect spot, the perfect this, that one person can tie everything up in court. I'm just using those numbers and make it simple. And we want everybody to have a say, but we also want decisions to be made once it's been said. And that's what those proposals that speed up the process and keeps the law, because you have and center it with FERC. That's the thing, because you have one agency making the decisions instead of, well, we made our decision, now it's got to go here, and then we made our decision, it's got to go back there. It becomes cumbersome. And that's what we're trying to speed the process. We don't want to change the standard. We just want to speed the process.
Let's talk about extreme weather, which has been a big issue. At a March 17th subcommittee hearing, the lesson from Winter Storm Fern was that reliable generation and better planning still matter. What did Fern tell you that Washington still hasn't fully absorbed since Elliott and some of the other big storms?
So we were better than those earlier ones because of some of the lessons learned in the earlier storms. But what it tells us, those charts from New England that I just pointed out, that having a wind and solar portfolio that dominates your portfolio wasn't sufficient during the most difficult times. And so when you subsidize wind and solar so people build it, and I'm for all the above, but I like Chris Wright, the best of the above. Sometimes it fits, it doesn't. You have to build up a backup generation, because on the day you need it the most, if it's not burning, then you have these. You have to have some kind of fossil fuel plant or nuclear plant or hydropower to produce the power that you need, and so it becomes very expensive to do that. So when wind and solar becomes your primary source of power, you have to build a secondary primary source of power, and that becomes expensive, and you incentivize that at the point where people, well, I really can't afford to build this natural gas plant because I can't sell the power, because on good days, which is most of the time, people are using wind and solar. And that's kind of the takeaways. We absolutely have to make sure we have dispatchable, reliable, and affordable power. People want to have the lights come on when they turn the lights on.
Yes, I would say that's right. Let's talk about, we're going to take a big chunk here, permitting reform. How do you define real permitting reform? And what would real permitting reform, actually do for generation and transmission build out?
The big thing is, so permitting for transmission and generation. So it's difficult to build a nuclear plant. It's difficult to build a natural gas plant. And so permitting reform speeds that process up. We have the oil, we have the gas, we have coal. We can clean, beautiful coal, as the president calls it. You can do it clean. You absolutely can. Nuclear is zero carbon. And energy. And so, it speeds up that process. But then, so you've got to have the generation. If you're going to build a gigawatt of power for a new plant, you have to be able to build that in the next year or two. You can't wait 10 years and China's already, it's a race against time. And that's where you go. And then, not only do you get the gas out of the ground in the Permian or the oil, you have to move it. And so all of it is important. So you got to create the molecules, you got to create the electrons, and you got to be able to get them to where people need them. And it all moves through pipelines, through, ships. I've had people tell me that they're having to use trains now to move some LNG because they can't get the right pipelines to do it. And pipelines are safer, they're more efficient. And it's speed, getting to speed up the process to meet the demand.
So let's handicap this a little bit. There has been bipartisan agreement that permitting reform is necessary. Congress got close with, on a number of occasions, let's say, to getting something done. What is the political choke point here? I mean, I'll ask you next about whether this can get done, but what has been the political choke point? Is it environmental review, litigation, state-federal overlap? Like, what holds this up from a policy perspective?
So there's several. So you got it. But, some of it is, people just have a different view of how you generate power. One of the European ministers of the environment, first thing he said was, after the Straits of Hormuz closed, he said, wow, this just proves the point. We need to be going to renewables. Well, you can't run Europe's tried that. Their prices are 3 times higher than ours. And so so there's some people that just say, well, fossil fuels are just wrong and bad. And I always tell people, if you're end game into the world kind of focus that we need to save from the end of the world is climate change, and the other is who's going to control AI. There's far more than 2 choices, I'll get that. Yeah. But if it's AI, if you choose the climate change, then you lose both. Because China is not being the best stewards of the environment. People talk about their renewable portfolio and so forth. They're building fossil fuels as massive amounts as well. And so the holdup is, one, getting that we need the energy, electron from every source we can get it. And then, do you preempt state? Do you not preempt state? California has taken refineries offline. I know that's not electricity. Refineries offline. Can the federal government say, no, you can't do that because it affects everybody else that lives other places? It's the preemption, I think, is the big thing. Who makes the decision? Whether it's a pipeline, it's a new plant, it's transmission lines going through a state. Do the state and local leaders get to make that decision when it has a national impact? Or is that left for Washington regulators to make? And that's the discussion.
So there's reconciliation. What other vehicles do we have here that could?
Well, we could do our own permit vehicle, and hope springs eternal. Whether it needs to be bipartisan, it's lasting. You think about it, we got some rural electronic co-ops here. If you're gonna double your current generation capacity, you want to make sure 2 to 4 years from now the rules don't change, because you got a 30-year investment to go. It's hard to guarantee anything for 30 years from Washington. But if it's bipartisan, it lasts longer and it's stable, and people can allocate resources based on what they can predict what the
should be a big win for Trump. I mean, it should. Trump should see this as something that would make.
And they do. They got people from the White House working on it. They are just. I know that Shelley Moore Capito and Shelley White House are discussing it. We're discussing it bipartisan on our side. The question, when you get down to the details, where do the states have their say? Where does the federal government have their say? You're going to have renewable, groups and subsidized to get this vote or the other vote. That's where it gets. The thing is, I guess I will leave with is that we all agree. What brings us together is we want America to dominate. How we get there, and people, well, if you go there, people are going to develop. So it's a lot of people from the other view of mine is we know we have all this ability to create energy, but we don't really like it. If we just don't create that, somebody's going to figure it out over here. And that's Europe. That's the European mentality. And so far, Europe will tell you they're begging for us to ship LNG gas to them. They have figured out they can't do it on just renewables. And they've made some really bad decisions that's cost, their standard of living. We had the same standard. Europe and the United States had the same standard of living in 2008. Now it's not anywhere close where we are because we have access to cheap energy. Yep. We absolutely have it. And it's in our shores. It's not something we have to depend on anybody else for. And we just need to make sure that we use that advantage.
Last question. What does success look like by the end of this Congress? What would you point to and say we made the grid more reliable, more affordable, and better prepared for the next wave of demand?
It would be bipartisan permit reform there. It would be where not every Democrat, not every Republican probably, but where a mass majority of Democrats and Republicans can vote to send to the market the signal that this is going to be this is what's going to be Washington's view for the foreseeable future, and can give you the confidence that to invest your money, to create the energy, so we beat China.
Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time. You have to get to the House Republican Conference meeting.
I know, you're probably going to, you get to know what's going on in there for some.
Well, I don't have my phone with me right now, and I haven't figured out a way to get messages to my brain yet, but once we get the grid more reliable and AI more powerful, I could get
I wish you knew, I'm sure you do, how many times we're in the middle of a heated debating conference among Republicans and somebody else stand up. I just want everybody to know that Jake Sherman just tweeted everything that he just said.
That's what they pay me a lot of money. Well, I guess they don't pay me a lot of money, but all right, thank you, sir.
Would you want to share with the crowd who your source is?
No, I will not. But you should just assume it's everybody.
Well, it's not me.
Thank you.
Thanks, I appreciate it. That's great.
And now we're going to welcome Congressman Jim Matheson to the stage. Could you just get back to Congress so you could tell me things that are going on in the Democratic caucus?
Well, I was not the most active member of the Democratic.
You were not. I remember that.
I'd go to some of those meetings, but I'd have to run out pulling my hair.
And then you just have to, you're poking your eyes out,
there you
correct?
Go.
And that was,
Those were the days.
Or just meditate a little bit. When you talk to electric cooperatives around the country, what are they most worried about right now? Is it reliability, affordability, supply, regulation, or simply just keeping up with demand?
Well,
or all of the above.
Yeah, I'd tell you that, but it is all the above, and they're all related. But I do think the reliability issue has been something that we've been sounding the alarm on for years. Before everyone realized that AI is creating this huge bump in projected demand, we already saw the demand growing based on electrification of the economy, heat pumps, electric vehicles, onshoring of manufacturing. This has been happening for a while, and at the same time, while we see this projected demand going up, supply has not been keeping up, and in fact, as you discussed with Brett Guthrie, we've seen a lot of plants that have been shut down already, and there's a bunch more projected to be shut down in the next 10 years. So this disconnect between supply and demand has been something that has been a concern for our members for a long time and continues to be a primary concern. And now you overlay it with the issue of affordability, which there are a lot of factors driving affordability, and growing demand is clearly one of them. But the whole electric supply chain is subject to increased cost pressures. It's not just about building a new power plant, although that's where the big dollars are. Building transmission lines, building substations, the meter next to a new house. All of that is experiencing inflation way above the general inflation rate over the last 5 years. So the affordability issue, which is being driven by demand in many ways, that's also top of mind for our membership.
Well, it's interesting because that should be a big political issue too, right? Affordability is a political, so we'll have to see whether there's a connection between affordability, political dynamics, and then getting permitting reform and other things done. Now, co-ops serve 42 million people across a huge geographic footprint. How does that change the reliability challenge compared with investor-owned utilities serving dense urban areas?
Well, I think that we do serve, we always say, the hardest, most expensive places to serve in America.
Easy job for you, right?
Easy for our members. 900 co-ops, we serve 56% of all the land mass in America. But let's remember, we're consumer-owned. We don't have shareholders. The consumers who receive the power also own the utility, and they elect the board that governs that utility. So local decision-making is kind of in the DNA of electric cooperatives. And look, we're part of the broader electric grid. We're not isolated on our own. So many of the issues about dealing with this increasing demand that affect the investor-owned utilities also affect electric co-ops. There's a commonality to that agenda. But to the extent that we are consumer-owned and we view everything through the eyes of the consumer in decision-making, gives us that perspective about making sure that we meet these demands so that when you flip the switch, the light goes on, but it's at a price where at the end of the month, the person can afford to pay their bill.
Your argument is basically that reliable and affordable power is non-negotiable. Do you think that Washington has fully internalized, I mean, I could tell you what your answer is to this already, has internalized that, or is there too much policymaking divorced from how the grid actually works?
Look, it's a complicated issue, and I'm not here to speak poorly of Congress or policy in general, but look, this is a tough issue.
I could do that for you if you want.
And I think there's a general awareness that this explosion of AI demand has caught everyone's attention, but the specifics for how you take on that challenge are a level of complexity where I'm not sure the policy world fully understands it. Sometimes it takes a crisis to bring issues to the forefront. We've had some blackout situations during winter storms over the last few years, but in general, the electric grid's worked pretty well.
Yeah.
So I am concerned that there's a level of complacency out there. And the problem with that is in this just-in-time approach to policymaking, we're in a business where you spend a lot of money. These are capital-intensive investments that have long lead times for 30 to 50 to 80-year assets, and we can't turn it around on a dime. And we see this huge increase in demand coming over the next 5 and 10 years, and we've got to start building like yesterday. And to the extent there's a policy role in helping us meet these reliability demands, we're behind.
So you've said the country is approaching a moment where there may not be enough electricity to go around. What would that look like in the real world for rural communities if policies don't change? You mentioned blackouts, but what could that look like?
Well, it's interesting. I refer to Jim Robb, who's the head of the North America Reliability Corporation. He says, we're really good for about 350 days of the year for the foreseeable future. But on those tough days where you probably really need it, like in the winter when it's super cold and you want to have power to run your furnace in your house, that's where the risk is. And the potential for that to grow, and we've seen it happen already in this country a few times in past winters, but that's where it really means something to our consumers is when you need it most, are the lights going to go on?
How are co-ops using federal infrastructure funding right now to harden the grid, rebuild aging systems, and keep electricity affordable?
Look, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act really did create some great opportunities for investments in the grid in terms of resilience. Electric cooperatives have certainly engaged in those opportunities just as much as all the other utilities. Mm-hmm. We've done it sometimes in a little bit different way. Electric cooperatives sometimes are smaller utilities, so we've built consortia of a group applying as a block together, and as a national association, we manage that consortia, and we've had great success in working with that program to build programs that are, for example, wildfire mitigation, so our systems are more resilient in terms of not causing wildfires in the first place, resilience against heavy storm damage. These are the kind of nuts and bolts investment people don't think about. They think about when the lights go on and off, and a power plant is what you think about, but the whole system has to work to keep the lights on, and those programs have been really valuable for electric cooperatives to enhance reliability and resilience in their system.
In places dealing with wildfire risk and extreme weather, how important are DOE and USDA tools for things like underground lines and broader resilience investments?
More important all the time for a lot of reasons. One is we have a growing wildfire risk in this country. There are wildfires in Nebraska this month, in March. So it's becoming not so much a regional issue, it's primarily in the western public land states, but it's really across the country where wildfire risk exists. Secondly, the litigation risk of wildfires is only growing. And we often say you're one bad event away from bankruptcy as a cooperative if you are found responsible for causing a wildfire. Making a decision about making those investments for, as you said, undergrounding lines, and there are other things you can do to mitigate that risk, that's essential. And it's essential for the whole country to do this. But when you think about electric cooperatives that cover 56% of all the land in America, and we got distribution lines, significant miles of lines across the country that are at risk because of this, those investments mean all the more for us.
Let's talk about permitting reform, and we're going to quickly run out of time, and we could talk about permitting reform for an hour, but we don't have time to do that. How would your members benefit from permitting reform? What is getting bogged down? Transmission, generation, environmental approval, rights of way, are those the kinds of things that are getting bogged down?
Yeah, they all are. It's very difficult to build anything in this country or even go access an existing right-of-way to clear out some trees that may fall on your lines.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. We need predictable permitting processes. We don't want to get rid of permitting processes, but we need one where you have a predictable amount of time, you get a thumbs up or thumbs down, you limit the litigation risk. That will help us make decisions in a more timely way and make the investments we've got to make. And by the way, permitting reform gets a lot of talk in Washington. I'm glad it is. I'm glad there's awareness about it. There's not just one bill or one statute we've got to change. There's so many different actions that Congress is going to have to take, and thank goodness we're looking at it to start. But Congress needs to do this. I want to piggyback to what Brett Guthrie said a couple of minutes ago about the value of certainty. We need to put this in statute. We can't have policy where every time we have a new person come to the White House, we boomerang back and forth. Congress has failed to do its job, in my opinion, in terms of setting policy in a way where we have greater certainty. And when you're in an industry like us, where you need that long-term certainty, this is where permanent reform would make a real difference.
So there's a lot of focus on the AI question and data centers and stuff like that. What is the right principle for co-ops when very large new customers, let's call it that, arrive in a community?
Look, I think every co-op's different. We have 900 of them across the country, and they have a lot of them have somebody knocking on their door talking about a data center. So we do have a lot of experience with this across our membership.
And you'll have even more.
And we're going to have more. And look, because we have 56% of the land in the country in the rural areas, data centers are going to go there where the land is, right? So we know that we're going to get a lot of action in the data center world. The key's pretty obvious at the general level. Data centers need to pay their fair share. As Brett Guthrie said, they got the capital to do it. We need to make sure that it makes sense for both the existing consumers of the electric cooperative and the data center. It's a complex negotiation that's going to be very specific to the individual utility, but there's a way to come out of this if we do it right that's a win-win for both the community, the current community and current consumers, and the addition of the data center. But there's also paths where you could take the real wrong direction, and it can be really bad for consumers. So, as is often the case, the devil's in the details. But we welcome that opportunity to engage with data centers and have those appropriate negotiations on behalf of our members.
5 years from now, which seems like a lifetime, but it'll go quickly, what do you hope people will say electric cooperatives did right in this moment of huge change for the grid?
I think it's that they were thoughtful about looking out for their consumers, because that's what they do, by the way. And I think that what would be great is if you could, 5 years from now, we could say, electric cooperatives understood how to maintain the community interest, because we're community owned. They maintain community interest in the negotiations and the deals and contractual relations that they have with data centers. If we can say that 5 years from now, that'd be a big win.
Unfortunately, we are all out of time. Big thank you to Chairman Guthrie for joining us before leaving for the House Republican Conference, where he will not be a source for me because he says he's not. And for the National Rural Electrical Association for partnering with us to make this event possible. Very important conversation, which is going to become even more important as data centers and all these other strains on the grid and strains on electrical use become more prominent. We have a bunch more events, including an Ag Summit tomorrow. You could RSVP to watch online at punchbowl.news/events. Have a great day, everybody, and stay safe.
Okay. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. It goes fast.